Good evening, everybody. It's a joy to be with you all here tonight for our latest installment of our webinar series, Common Ground, Faithful Action, Speaking Truth to Power. My name is Robin Fillmore, and I serve as the co-chair on the Commission on the Beloved Community, the team within our conference dedicated to creating spaces for dialogue and transformation. We are particularly honored to spend some quality time tonight with Justin Seward. This presentation is deeply personal to me because I have known Justin since he was in high school, I think. I forget what
Yep.
year. Yep, in high school. And as a member of my former church, one of my parishioners, Lake Winona United Methodist Church, and used to fill in for me sometimes when I would be out. So it's a profound joy to see him sharing his gifts with us tonight. Before we dive into the conversation, I have a few digital housekeeping items. If you are seeking CEUs for tonight, if you need any continuing education units, please drop your name and your email address in the chat, and we can accurately track your attendance and get you that certification when we are finished in a couple of days. If you have questions as they come up, please post your questions in the Q&A feature throughout the presentation at the bottom. We have dedicated time at the end to pose those questions to Justin. We'll keep an eye out for a follow-up email from me in the coming days to talk about if there's any next steps or specific support you might need to carry this work forward in your own communities. And last but not least, our next session will be on May 31st, where we will be joined by the Reverend Dr. Alexia Salvatierra, and she will be offering a just response to the border crisis. And I will drop the registration link into the chat for that as well. So now it's my distinct honor to introduce Reverend Chris Sledge, who will be guiding the conversation with Justin tonight. In addition to being my partner in leading the Commission on the Beloved Community, Chris is the lead pastor of the Journey Church in Harrisburg and is also the co-author of the book Followers Under 40. Chris, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Robin. Grateful for your partnership and co-leadership, Beloved Community. Good evening, friends. It's good to see you all. Justin, it is indeed a gift and an honor to introduce you and to have you a part of our kind of conversation webinar series. I had the privilege of meeting Justin last year at our annual conference session in Williamsport, and found him to be a brilliant leader within our conference and within our church. I'm grateful that he's one of ours, and the privilege it is to have him part of this conversation. So Justin is United Methodist Seminarian, studying at Harvard Divinity School. During his undergraduate studies at University of Pennsylvania, at UPenn, he began studying the period of American Reconstruction and the ongoing legacy of slavery in the Confederacy. Working with a noted scholar, Donovan Schaefer, his research explores Black collective memory of Confederate commemoration and its implications for contemporary racial inequality. And indeed, Justin is a candidate for ministry in the Susquehanna Conference. So welcome, Justin. Tonight, Justin will lead us in a framing presentation around his work. And so we'll begin with that. Justin, would you begin?
Thank you so much for inviting me and having me. It's always great to have the support of the conference and the church. And I as every grad student will tell you, love to talk about my research. So I'm going to start with a little presentation tonight. Let me see if I can share that now. Great. Okay. Um, so I wanted to first walk through my research and research design. The project began, it was my freshman year at Penn in Philadelphia. I was just introduced to like the world of academic research, and I joined a project led by Donovan Schaefer, who's a fairly noted religious studies scholar. And he wanted to look at Black memory and Black experience of Confederate monuments. And so the questions that led us there in our research are twofold. The first is, how do Black Americans respond to Confederate commemorations, that is, monuments, flags, holidays, and so much more throughout history? And second, how did Black thoughts change over time regarding Confederate commemorations? That is, we know it's not static, we know it's not stagnant, but we know it's changing. How is it changing? So those are our two guiding questions that led us through the research. I will spare you too many of the details of the research design, but a little overview. We looked at Black newspapers. So I searched through about all Black newspapers that exist to this day. Many were not preserved throughout history, but I did my best to search as many as possible. It was over 500 I ended up searching through to find materials on the Confederate monuments and flags and all that. We used the term commemoration to broadly categorize all that. And so about 100, exactly 100 newspapers had material on commemorations, and that led us to an archive of 1,224 individual articles, which is a lot of data to have on memory. It's in fact the largest project I've encountered that is not based on social media, where you can have millions of data points. This is the largest historical project I've encountered looking at the way we understand the past. Um, and the time frame we're looking at here today is 1880 to 1974. And we worked through a number of archives to gather our resources, which much thanks and love to all the archivists and librarians who helped us along the way. And the way we searched is using keywords. So it's very similar to how you use Google. You use certain words that you are most connected to the ideas that you want to search up. And so there's a couple of sample here. That's how we went and found everything. And there's sort of a brilliance of modern technology and something called optical character recognition that we can go and to digitally search through millions and millions of records of Black newspapers. Truly, we were in the right moment in time to do this kind of research. I want to give a little bit of a historical background. So on January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all enslaved persons in Confederate territories free. Yet the full realization of this decree awaited the end of the Civil War and the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which formally abolished slavery. Until then, American society was fundamentally a slave society, with over 4 million Africans in bondage. The war itself was catastrophic for the South. Hundreds of thousands of men and boys were killed or severely wounded. Railroads, harbors, cities, and other pieces of infrastructure were totally destroyed. And white supremacist social structures governing education, work, commerce, and law were completely dismantled. So the widespread destruction of the Southern society cannot be overstated. This image is from Richmond, showing a little bit of the devastation. Hard to see in the black and white, but the entire city in the background is destroyed, with the bridge up in the forefront here. The slave society, which produced and organized all of these features, was dead. The aftermath of the war was devastating to the identities of Americans, Northern and Southern, white and Black, where the nation reborn had to redefine identity and race relations from the ground up, while struggling to materially and politically recover. The politics of redefining identity were most salient during the Reconstruction era, which is defined by historians as between 1865 and 1876. This is a period where Northern federal forces were occupying the South, a military occupation, and they also were governing everyday life, total replacement of state governments and the former Confederate States of America. And that continued, that sort of identity redefining period continued to be debated long in the 20th century. And some scholars have just suggested we're still debating that exact thing today. Let's see. Here's some more pictures of the devastation. I just want to really show you how much infrastructure was completely destroyed. That gets us to the background I want to start for, well, what does this have to do with Confederate monuments? Um, So in the midst of federal occupation under Reconstruction, the South adopted an apologetic national mythology outlined in Edward Pollard's 1867 book, Lost Cause: A New Southern History of the War of the Confederates. Now, this lost cause redefines the white Southern cause as a righteous struggle for states' rights and regional autonomy rather than a rebellion to preserve slavery. The Lost Cause ideology portrayed Confederate leaders, particularly figures like Confederate General Robert E. Lee, as virtuous and honorable men who fought nobly for a just cause, while downplaying or outright denying the central role of slavery in the conflict. The narrative romanticized the antebellum South as a harmonious and civilized society, often depicting enslaved people as content and loving toward their masters. This warped history sought to rehabilitate the image of the Confederacy and serve to reinforce racial hierarchies. I also want to point out that women had a very important part in this particular narrative. As you could imagine, hundreds of thousands of men and boys were killed in this war. And so women were both grief-stricken as widows and orphans and all that. That's part of the story of like a real grief that we should honor in some way towards these women who wanted to see their loved ones remembered. There's a moment in which the honoring the grief that they're experiencing moved into a political realization that happens in the late 1800s. And so I want to just flag that. And I think this monument of General Lee, which stood in Richmond for 130 years, 31 years, something like that, was the sort of the pinnacle of that moment, I think. So 1890, which was also the decade, 1890s was the peak of lynching of Black Americans. So there's a lot happening in this time period. So I just want to leave that for the context. Now I'm going to move in. This is a little bit of a crash course. Sorry about that. Into what we did as researchers, and particularly my role. So all that to be said, we move into a time period of these Southerners working with this lost cause myth, that their cause was justified and righteous. That goes beyond just grief. It's about redefining their political entity. It's about regaining power because the Southern states have been stripped of power. And there's this movement of Confederate monuments, and they start popping up everywhere. One scholar called it a mania, a memorial mania, because of how often and widespread the phenomenon was. And so we're looking at how did Black Americans respond to that movement? Because they were caught up in the middle of this for the last century. And so my findings suggest that 5% of Black Americans, or not 5% of Black Americans, 5% of responses end up being positive. I'll put a pin in that one for later. It's likely that that's probably more of a regurgitation of actual white perspectives than it is authentic Black perspective. 43% of the articles I was looking at were sort of more neutral, which is news articles. So they're more neutral to begin with. Now, I want to focus in on the 52% of articles that were negative. That includes news articles that had a bias, a very obvious bias, as well as editorials, letters to the editors, and other sort of genres within newspapers. And so that gives you a spread of what's going on. And it's not a very good looking spread for the opinion of Confederate monuments. And so there's four main reasons that they use to justify their negative reactions towards Confederate commemoration. The first being treason, second, sectionalism. That sectionalism means there's a divide between North and South, and that's bad. We need to heal the nation or come back together. Slavery and racism. So there's 4 points here. So we're looking at a graph now that traces the way treason was used in rhetoric. And just general flag here, you can see a decline. I hope that's obvious. Um, so treason started off very strong. It is also still it was the most dominant reaction, that the Confederacy is bad. We shouldn't be commemorating it because they were treasonous. Um, Odd thing to say as a Black American who was formerly enslaved. It's slightly an odd thing to say. However, it's also the thing that all the white people were saying in the North. And so there is a certain sort of level of respectability politics happening here, as well as um, issues of safety. And so, like, what can you say as a Black American? What can you think as a Black American in this time period? There's, we have lots of evidence of Black presses being burned down because of what they were saying. And so this is a way of criticizing what's happening using the language of the North as their shield. And so we can see later on as the years go by, as the Union veterans start passing away, a lot of this rhetoric sort of dies out. Um, that's the first one. The second one is sectionalism. So we shouldn't be doing Confederate monuments because that furthers the divide between the North and the South. Um, and this, similar to treason, very similar language to treason, but just a little bit different, starts out very strong. And then it declines as the Confederate and Union veterans start to die out, because they're the ones who are really caring about treason and the divide and all that. As it starts to die out, we see a big resurgence all of a sudden, right after World War II. And that's actually because of the rhetoric around communism, that we shouldn't be doing Confederate monuments because we can't be a divided nation against communism. We need to be a unified entity. We can't be North and South. We must be one America. And so it became politically relevant to speak about Confederate monuments against them, through this language of communism and sectionalism. That would be the second way of talking about it. The way you'd expect, first and foremost, for most of us, would probably be slavery. Slavery was a consistent through line through all of this. A lot lower than treason in the beginning, though, but there's a little jump in the middle. A jump in the middle corresponds to the refounding of the Ku Klux Klan, which happened on a Confederate monument, that being Stone Mountain in Georgia, I believe it's the largest monument in the United States, bigger than Mount Rushmore. And it's in a major metropolitan area. Yeah. And the Ku Klux Klan sort of inspires a lot more rhetoric towards race, a lot of the racial violence that was happening. Also, the Ku Klux Klan founds the political ideology of white supremacy. They're the ones who create the term itself, white supremacy. So when we talk about white supremacy, it's not us, creating this thing that doesn't really exist. It's literally what they were advocating for on their signs and their protests. And so slavery is a consistent through line. And the last one, which I think is the most interesting, is racism. Now, when racism becomes the point of critique. So when does it make sense for Black Americans to say the Confederate monuments are bad because of they're racist, that they create racial division or racial discrimination along those lines? Where does race sort of come in as a category of critique? And it's sort of an invention. We can see it very clearly at the end of World War II in the 40s, and maybe a little bit before, during the Great Depression. Just racism explodes as a category, and it continues to be the most dominant one today, which is um, it's like it requires a new mindset, a new way of thinking about these things, that like legitimizes our racial reality and racial hierarchy in the United States. And so I'm gonna leave it there for the findings. I just wanted the points of these different categories of critique is that when you look at all four of them, you're actually looking at the ways in which we've invented our language to talk about these things. Nothing is essential, nothing is permanent. There is no right or wrong way of looking at Confederate monuments. There's always going to be new language, new ways of thinking about these things that happen in our past, and that they change. And it's changed within the Black critique. We also saw that white Americans had their own change, from profound grieving after the war to trying to like get a one up on the North. And there's something to be said about the change and transformation that can happen in our own thinking about things that are in the past that have already happened. They're fixed. And for some reason, they're still alive. That's where I want to, provoke that question for everyone tonight.
Thank you for sharing that. And I was, hopefully, our siblings who are watching were taking copious notes as I was, to kind of make meaning out of how the Black community and the Black community's opinions trying to grapple with significant pain points in our shared history within Black Americans' history. So we have a couple of kind of questions that I will ask that we worked on together that you sent Justin. So I'll ask some of those, and then I have some additional questions to wonder with you about. And friends, just as a reminder, at any point you can put a question in the Q&A function, and we would love to share that as well. So um, it's kind of in light of this, and maybe in light of this kind of as you name this kind of category of kind of racism that kind of has emerged kind of post World War II. So I'm just going to ask the first question, like when you look at the state of the world and the church right now, what do you believe the Spirit is most kind of urgently inviting us to pay attention to? Now, this is a question we've been asking every speaker in this webinar series, but I'd love for you to kind of answer that in light of kind of your own thinking, kind of around kind of Black memory in this moment.
I think I would begin by saying like where does the church exist right now? Where is the Spirit being calling us in this moment? Um, I think there's the Spirit is calling us as individuals to new things every day. So I'm not going to speak to that, I don't think. I will speak to the ways in which we individually are supposed to respond to these things. I will speak to what the church is supposed to be doing in response to us as a collective. Um, and I would begin by saying that the church is always tempted to misunderstand its own vocation. We can begin to think that our task is to preserve the institution and defend our territory, win the argument, or outmaneuver those who seem ignorant or hostile. Which the findings I just showed, I think, really uh, point to that almost that like we should be identifying what these people are saying and working against it or something like that, something very working within the political world. And I don't think that's true. Um, and this semester in seminary, I've been taking class on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I've been very moved by what he has to say for what does the church have to do for the world in this moment. And for those who don't know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor, a Lutheran pastor and theologian in the early 20th century, profound theologian. His early works are just masterpieces of academic scholarly theology. He was eventually executed by the Nazis for his work in the opposition. And Bonhoeffer warns against the temptation to engage in the world on the world's own terms. And for him, the church does not exist as a religious society protecting its own interest. The church exists as a witness to what God has already done for the world in Christ and what God is calling the world to now. Um, and he says, when God in Jesus Christ claims space in the world, even space in a stable, because there was no other place in the inn, God embraces the whole reality of the world in this narrow space and reveals its ultimate foundation. So also, the Church of Jesus Christ is the place, that is the space in the world where the reign of Jesus Christ over the whole world is to be demonstrated and proclaimed. The space of the church does not, therefore, exist just for itself, but its existence is already always something that reaches far beyond it. This is because it is not the space of a cult that would have to fight for its own existence in the world. Rather, the space of the church is the place where witness is given to the foundation of all reality in Jesus Christ. The church is the place where it is proclaimed and taken seriously that God has reconciled the world to himself in Christ. that God so loved the world that God gave his son for it. The space of the church is not there in order to fight with the world for a piece of its territory, but precisely to testify to the world that it is still the world, namely the world that is loved and reconciled by God.
Mhm.
It is not true that the church intends to or must spread its space out over the space of the world. It desires no more space than it needs to serve the world with its witness to Jesus Christ and to the world's reconciliation to God through Jesus Christ. The church can only defend its own space by fighting not for space, which is the political space, the world in its own terms, but for the salvation of the world. Otherwise, the church becomes a religious society that fights in its own interest and thus has ceased to be the church of God in the world. I think that the Spirit is urgently inviting the church to recover the difference between self-preservation and witness. We're living in a moment when many churches feel anxious about decline and division and social change. I mean, how many of us have spent how many hours sitting through conferences and meetings and seminars about decline and this division and social change? And that anxiety can turn the church inward, making us think that our primary task is to protect our place in the world. And that is not true. As Luther paints for us, which is what Bonhoeffer is working with here, sin is turning inwards to oneself. It's an egocentrism that is like self-preservation. But Bonhoeffer reminds us that the church's space exists for the world. The church is called to tell the truth, to serve, to reconcile, to repair, and to bear witness to the God who loves the world. So I don't think the Spirit is calling us to fight the world's sin on the world's terms. Um, the Spirit is calling us to proclaim and embody the love of Jesus Christ. We can write resolutions naming every form of social and personal sin. I'm going to invite my own resolution at the annual conference coming up here soon. We could do that. We can speak from the pulpit about what is wrong. And those things may be necessary. They may even, but they're just not sufficient. Naming harm is the only beginning of Christian action. Um, the deeper work is forming people in the compassion of Christ and conforming our communities to the mind of Christ and becoming the kind of witness through which the world can encounter a different way of being human. Um, and this connects directly to my research, we can show how deeply human beings are shaped by the stories they inherit and the passions of their own moment. Memory is not going to be neutral. It's not going to be just something that we can ignore. People remember through their fears and loyalties and interests and political needs. We see this in the rise of the lost cause. We also see it in the Black press, where arguments against Confederate commemoration changed over time. When communism became a central fear in American public life, Black Americans could revive the language of sectionalism to paint it as a symbol of division, which is a useful tactical role. And it doesn't mean the memory is false. It just means that memory is always something formed within the pressures of the moments. And the church has to understand that we're all also vulnerable to the passions of our day. We can absorb the terms of our political culture, mistake them for faithfulness. That if we if we all conform to a certain way of doing politics, a certain way of doing this or that, that can be mistaken for faithfulness. And begin to treat Christian witness as another form of social combat. But the church is called to be set apart from the world. We do not, we do have something to say in this moment, and what we have to say cannot simply be the language of culture war and politics again and again and again. We won't win on those terms. Our witness is the love of Christ, the truth of Christ, the compassion of Christ, the reconciliation of the world in Christ. That is where I think the Spirit is pressing us most urgently. The church must become a people capable of forming individuals into loving and compassionate followers of Christ. We need to look honestly at the stories that have formed us, especially the stories that have justified racial harm, and then ask how Christ is calling us to remember, speak, and act differently in this moment. The goal is more than proving that something is wrong against the lost cause or some other thing. The goal is to become a community who couldn't imagine honoring evil acts of chattel
Mm,
slavery and treason in our public spaces.
mm,
That's the goal, to be unable to imagine that world, which is
mm,
what the church is called to.
mm. Wow, thank you, Justin. Uh, wow. What a gift it is to hear your articulation, both from drawing upon the those who've gone before us, the great giants of civil rights and of healing and of like liberation, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and then kind of drawing it to yourself. So I guess I have maybe some simple questions that maybe try to for me to sift through kind of the brilliance of what you're saying. So on one hand, I hear you calling the church shifting away from self-preservation and more to a kind of this witness perspective. And you kind of uttered quickly after kind of self-preservation, you kind of remarked around how um, self-preservation we see kind of a declining of social power and just of responsibility, even just like building and people, and then kind of this call of witness. So I'm just curious, have you done any research, or do you have any sense of as kind of this kind of movement of Confederate kind of monuments and flags were kind of rising kind of in the South, kind of post Civil War. Um, what was the role of the church? Were Christians involved, maybe in a complicit manner? Like, because it kind of strikes me in this moment as you're challenging us to think about our witness. What was the witness of Christians and the role or the nature of complicity like for Confederate Christians?
So the I'll start, in our own home and in our own house. The founder of the Ku Klux Klan was a Methodist minister,
Mm.
and that is our history.
Maybe we should
Um,
just sit in that for a minute. That's yeah. Thank you for reminding us of our own history.
so that is, I think, where we should start, in the United Methodist Church. Um, that I mean, the history of the split between North and South is
Hmm.
also just so salient in this moment, because it like the people who are criticizing, prophetically, the Confederate commemoration, aren't doing it for the best reasons, in my research experience of the um,
Hmm.
of the white church. The Northerners who are criticizing it are doing it in terms of treason because they want political power.
Ah.
It's not because they're pure of heart. Now, the Black church, on the other hand, is doing crazy amounts of real moral work. That there's uh, probably 2 dozen articles by the bishops of the AME Church, calling it out for what it is. There's just real good prophetic witness of what's happening. However, the lack of material and political power makes it very difficult to actually prevent commemorations from happening. Although they can remind their own population, their own people, that they are honored and that they are also sacred, and that the memory of slavery is not something to be dismissed. And so I think the work of healing within the Black church should be an example for us.
So what I hear in that, just to be as explicit as possible, white church viewed this as a place of called it a treason for their own political power by and large, and the black church was was a prophetic witness to the healing and to the Imago Dei, to the sacred worth of all humans. Is that a fair summary of what you just said?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. What one more question off script, and then I'll come back to the next question. How do you see that reality showing up today? And maybe it's less around specific Confederate commemoration, but still the sentiment, right? Still the kind of the drawing back to even the kind of states' rights and so some of that initial language. How would you say to that, Justin?
I think, I mean, there truly is, there's so many things to be said about this topic, and where it pops up its ugly head up over and over again. I think I think we can. I'm gonna double down on the Christianity here.
Please.
I think wherever in our political moment in which we are infuriated by something, we should analyze our motivations. Where does that come from?
Wow.
And the memories in which we are swimming in. And if our reaction comes out of a place like those Northerners, those white Northerners who are saying treason, comes out of a place of wanting something for ourselves, preserving something for ourselves, getting us more power or influence or something like that. If that's if that's what we're doing, that's the issue. And we need to first serve others to get rid of the egocentrism. And so you pick a topic and we can apply that to it. And it goes all over the political spectrum for that. Um, I'm thinking of I guess specifically like um, the ways in which companies have co-opted Black Lives Matter or Black empowerment as a movement, or Pride and like queer liberation, and there's pinkwashing and all that
Mm-hmm.
greenwashing. The ways in which
Mm-hmm.
we get the capitalism that
Mm-hmm.
uses these things for its own gain, and then all of a sudden it's cheap. It doesn't actually do what we want it to do. It's not actually healing in the way we want it to be healing, and we have to be wary of that. That's what I'll say.
Mm-hmm. Um, that again, there's so many kind of one-liners and things that I'm just drawing out from you, Justin. So thank you. Like to regularly check our motive when we're infuriated, or to draw this analogy quickly to the church, when churches begin to make statements, um, what is the motive of their statement? Is it to be seen acceptable, or even like to continue to speak to a particular group of people for potentially their own self-preservation, to seem prophetic, to seem like that they are speaking to the time, rather than wanting to witness to God, and to kind of witness to the kind of liberating healing work, to form people into people of compassion, as you said. Like, is that our genuine work, or is it to make a really good public statement
Yeah.
for the church's benefit? Okay, so thank you for this. I might come back to this. So you mentioned in your finding, which was fascinating to me, kind of this dramatic shift in how black memory kind of shifted from kind of treason. I mean, you kind of worked through treason, sectionalism, slavery, and then to kind of this like late 19th century kind of, from there to like the racism to the mid 20th century. And so like how does kind of the way in which the Confederacy, where it kind of began in grief, and I would love to ask a question around that. So I'm gonna kind of complicate the question, Justin, but I hope you'll be a friend in this with me. Like, because my curiosity is like, how should grief be honored? Now, like I'm saying this as a brown male who's really hesitant to even talk about, but you talk about women in this, right? Which that was a helpful. You personalized this for me in a way that I'm agitated by. Like, there's a way in which grief, how should grief be honored, and then it ended up with this kind of shifting of justification for the Confederacy. And so, how does all of this help us understand the church today? Does that make any sense, Justin? I tried to do a lot there in that question.
Um, so let me start with the question of grief and like where
Please.
grief probably puts in. Um, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm a theologian of grief, or where how we should publicly be doing our grieving. Um, I certainly am still learning my pastoral skills on that end. I think there's there's probably two things at play here. One is that there is real grief, there's real pain and sorrow, even for people who have done terrible things. Um,
Mhm.
and like uh, that's one thing. The other thing is that the church, that Christians are called um, to speak in our present moment. Like God is speaking now. I know God is speaking to our presence right now. The past is his own thing. What are we going to do now? Is the question. And I think so much of our political climate in the world right now is wrapped up in the who has harmed who last? And the difficult question, difficult challenge that Christ offers to us is that we must break out, and we break out through our own self-sacrifice, and that is it's radical and revolutionary for those who are in power and must give up their power. And it's also a big ask for communities who have been harmed. And that is just where we stand. I'm not probably versed well enough. I don't have the pastoral skills yet. Let's work on it together, I guess. But how do we engage communities who have been harmed so much? Um, uh, and tell them that we must rise above. Um, I'm not exactly sure what to do with that. I do think that um, when I spent a lot of time with this years at this point. What do we do with these women who are grieving? At first I was like, well, who cares? They're being ridiculous, and they previously enslaved people, and like it was like that's the reaction. It's just not helpful. It's not actually doing anything. We're not getting anywhere by doing that. We're going to get somewhere by not working with the terms of the world and by working with the terms of Christ. And that's just the plain gospel for me, which still probably a little rough around the edges. But I hope that gets to some of the question there.
Yeah, that really does. Thank you. And I'm aware of time, so I'm gonna kind of help ask a couple more questions. But um, I think when you're how do we form people into people of compassion, we have to sit in the complexity of the human experience. And so just holding the tension of grief. Thank you for that. So you talk about the lost cause, which was this kind of highly successful attempt to redefine kind of identity and history. And you kind of your work that you shared with us and even in your writing highlights how Black journalists defended themselves with their kind of own memory of the events. And so what kind of specific kind of rhetorical tools did these journalists use to that might serve as a tool for kind of modern faith leaders trying to dismantle false historical narratives kind of in our own cities, in our own context?
Yeah. I think there's, I mean, the Black Americans were throughout this whole history of Confederate commemoration were, it's going to sound really silly. They were just using evidence. They were able to remind people that the Confederacy was actually fought over slavery, which is uh, somehow people were forgetting, or they were purposely sort of ignoring that fact. And to be a thorn in the side is, I think, um, really important. And that was probably the major rhetorical thing they were doing was just reminding people that this is happening, that this happened in this context. And it's not even like it was hard to figure out. Um, but I'm not sure also that Black newspapers ever changed a white person's mind about the Confederate monuments. I'm not sure that I'm certain that the white readership of these newspapers was very low, if any at all, for most of the time. Um, but they were doing something internally for their own community, which is there's a difference between being within a marginalized community and speaking to the hegemony of the dominant
Mhm.
society. And so it was doing something very important within. Um, like I said, there was never a successful Black resistance to any monuments, really ever, until quite recently, when the
Mhm.
monuments came down in like 2020, 21.
Mhm.
Um, so I would say that. I also think there's a certain resilience that we should be honoring and remembering and looking to as inspiration. I'm thinking of like IDB Wells, the
Mhm.
very famous Black journalist in the late
Mhm.
1800s. She, she has so many death threats. They burned her printing press down when she was in Memphis doing anti-lynching
Mhm.
propaganda, or like just printing against lynching and just publicizing the giving awareness to the public. the horror of lynching. And yeah, they chased her out of town, but she kept on going, and she kept on being a witness. And I think there's something there that we should also take away. Just we must be resilient in the fights, and it's not going to happen now. Lynching of Black Americans continues to this day, but we've made a hell of a work out of it. We're doing quite a bit better than the 1890s. And there's something to say about the progress that is due to people who are committed to the cause, like Wells. And so that's what I'll say.
Good. Thank you. Let me can I ask kind of a question that's somewhat connected? So I'm grateful to kind of just a reminder that Civil War was indeed fought over slavery and not about states' rights, and your reminder of like just to remind people what's happening over and over. So my first pastoral appointment in our conference, Justin, I had two prominent leaders of our church who proudly waved Confederate flags outside of their homes and within their homes. So kind of outside on a flagpole and then within their homes, and they were quite proud of that, right? And so I'm just curious if today in the spirit of resilience and truth telling, and to remind people what's been happening. I'm curious for you. What would you want to say to a white American who still has this kind of maybe personal draw to kind of flags or holidays or desire for monuments? What would you say? What would be the truth telling you would want to say today, even to United Methodists in my first appointment, or just those within our country today?
Um, I likewise have people who are very close to me who have Confederate flags and memorabilia of that such. Even though we're in Pennsylvania, very northern, and all that, I have ancestors who were in the Civil War on the Union side, so there's definitely a cognitive dissonance to begin with for our area. Um, but I think uh, the work is long and hard, and so
Yeah.
there's nothing I'm going to say to anyone that I see them with a flag, I approach them, I say something, I'm not going to change their mind. It's just not happening. And
Mhm.
the real work is getting to know them, and I mean, I this is my theological point, I guess, is that like to share the gospel with them, that
Mhm.
this is uh, that there is a certain compassion, a certain intellectual rigor that we must have, critical and reflective in the ways in which we act, um, and are analyzing our motivations. That is actually just what fleeing from sin is
Mhm.
actually just to be self-reflective of our own actions. And
Wow.
that is, I think, part of this whole conversation is it's a very personal relationship you must develop to share that way of thinking, which I would argue is the way of Christ. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that's how we get to people. And it's you gotta swallow a lot of your pride. I think I've been known to fight in the comments of Facebook and Instagram and elsewhere. You might see me around sometime. Just know, just know Justin's having a time, okay?
Mhm.
Um, but it's not doing anything. It's just not doing anything. And the real work is going to be
Mhm.
sitting down at the table together.
Mhm. That's thank you for that. And uh and the always the answer is more challenging and more human and more grace-filled than what we want it to be. We want to just out to wit someone in a comment section, but we just know that's probably not how true transformation will work. Just for fun, like the first time I was in this appointment, somehow, maybe through an act of God or just the weather, a lightning strike hit the flagpole of one of my church members and knocked over that Confederate flag, which reminded me, Justin, that God is still at work in this crazy
That's right.
work of God and ministry that through relationship and storms, things like that. Let me ask a different question. It's same question. different side, what would you want to say to a Black American who is grappling with the reeling effects of white supremacy and historical nature of racism and slavery, who recognize that for often we're still swimming in the waters, um, as Starlet would say, or kind of around like kind of white supremacy. Starlet Thomas, who was on our webinar last time. So, what would you say to a Black American who still sees Confederate flags, this kind of drawing back of American of to even to yours, use your language that you used earlier, kind of this slave society, fundamental slave society here in the United States.
I think um, I think there's a my first reaction would be I'm so sorry that we didn't listen to you earlier. That like your experience was just so invisible. But I see you now. And we're in it together now. Um, as speaking as I guess white people or something like that. But it's like I like there's a uh I can recognize that we've been in you've been in this work for a very long time. This has been your experience for a very long time. But hopefully, we are at a stage where we can see each other in our experiences. And it is only through that personal connection, that sociality, that we are going to move forward. And so. Uh, yeah, I often think about if only um, we had listened earlier, what what would have come? Certainly, uh, uh, people would not have died. Heather Hayes at the
Mhm.
Charlottesville Unite the Right rally in 2017, she would be still if we just had listened earlier. And there's a lot of that history out there. Um, so if only we had listened earlier, but the time is right
Yes, right.
to do what is right.
Hmm. That's good. Thank you for just saying those words. And maybe whoever might hear this today or in the future or interacts with you, may this be a healing space for them as well. I have three questions that I have from those who are tuning in. So, sorry, I'm going to ask those of you, and then I'll invite you to have a final word at the end, Justin. So, one question someone commented: I've never considered the grief of the women in the South over their loss of sons and husbands. Going back to the grief, it was more powerful to hear a more feminist. That was powerful to hear a more feminist interpretation of the monument. However, I'm wondering what a womanist interpretation of these monuments would be. Would highlighting the grief of Southern white women prop up white fragility?
Um, so this research is being published as a book coming out in 2027 through Fordham University Press. And in that book, there'll be a lot more explanation on the dynamics of gender and race as they were happening. Because women played the most pivotal role in this. They fundraised and designed all the monuments. They proposed them at the town council meetings. Women are central to this, as are Black women. Black women have been writing in these newspapers as well. Certainly less than Black men. Probably on the order of like 90% men, 10% women. That's also a reality. The historical record for Black women is just not as physical and tangible as it is for men. Um, so we have a lot of oral history. There's a great book uh, by a scholar that just came out. That explores oral history of Black communities, and it's through like the porch stories of
Hmm.
Black women sharing their history. That's where you can find it. So it's not gonna be in these newspapers. But if you wanted the Black womanist perspective on this, it is out there. I just unfortunately don't have the physical written data on that. And so I could probably share afterwards the name of that book. It's not on my tip of my tongue right now.
That's great. Thank you, Justin. Another question. How much, if any, impact did the rhetoric of abolitionists like John Brown in Kentucky or Kansas have on this mindset shift?
Huge. So John Brown was huge in the interpretation of monuments from the very beginning. John Brown is a folk hero to many, and especially dear to the Black community. And so there's a monument in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, where the John Brown attempted his slave revolt um, uh, to um, to the Confederacy in some capacity. I'm getting the details, but um, the way the Black press responded to the proposal of that monument was insane for being how small and backwater the place is. But they adored John Brown. They very infrequently ever suggested physical violence or revolt in any way that John Brown's rhetoric might suggest. But they did honor him as a folk hero and put him on quite a pedestal themselves. So if you think about how memory is formed, they chose him as their hero in the
Mm.
story, which is neither right or wrong. It's just the way the interpretation happened. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah. Another question. Do you worry that the baggage people who are in power or privilege can carry when seeking to be self-sacrificial can keep them silent when they need not to be? Example, realizing that their motives are not perfectly pure keeps them from being the church in these areas. Can people of privilege move toward, say, a more sanctified response, moving forward perfection in love, moving toward perfection in love, while still grappling with the fact that because sin is real, our motives are maybe not one way or the other perfect, but getting better while acting for justice.
I think we, yeah, definitely to honor I like the language of baggage, that baggage of our motivations and the guilt that we feel for the
Mhm.
things we've done in the past, the beliefs we held in the past, as well as our resistance to change in the present. Um, so I think I'll start there. That is real, and it's very human. It's the way we are, um, but we are called to walk onwards to perfection. Um, and I think. I think that for me, accountability is the number one thing. And so I seek people out who are going to keep me accountable, who I can share my inner life and the way my motivations are going about. Especially, I'm doing research on race as a white man in America. And so
Mhm.
I'm seeking people out to make sure I'm not going crazy and that I'm not speaking out of turn or out of my lane. Um, and
Mhm.
so uh, you need to create the community who's going to keep you accountable, keep you to your word,
Mhm.
and make sure that you have the power with, by God's grace within yourself, already. God has already offered it to you.
Mhm.
And so we need people to remind you that you have that God has already claimed you. Um, and so I think that's what I would say, and from my own experience.
Mhm. We do, I think, need those people indeed. And particularly our white siblings probably need that in any place or position of power. Final question, and then I'll give you the final word. I was in a conversation with another African American person who said they wish we would stop fighting for monuments be changed because it is a reminder for them of what we have overcome. So my question is there a way in which we can find a way to see these monuments as things our ancestors have defeated instead of seeing them as instruments of oppression?
Um, there there's a very interesting rhetoric shift. It's very late in my data set, so I didn't have a slide on it, but the ways in which the sectionalism gets turned on its head a little bit, that these monuments are furthering our division, that we shouldn't be putting them up. Gets turned, and all of a sudden it becomes the monuments are up. We need to stop fighting about it because it's dividing us. And so it's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum that there's an impetus, a motivation for forgiveness, for moving on, for just to reconfigure, this is what life is, and we need to continue. And that harping on the past like that is bad. That's a very minor minority
Mhm.
perspective, but that definitely is present in the data. And I think, how do you respond to someone who is saying that? At first, it's like that's a very reasonable reaction to be like, to either see change how we see as a tribute to victory. There's some people call it the one cause because which is similar flipping on the head of the lost cause that because the Confederacy uh, was flipped on its head in the Lost Cause that like they're poor they're oppressed by the North but they did all these monuments and so they actually won because
Mm,
they actually reinstated their slave society through the incarceration and the carceral system that there's like they actually did win in a
mm,
certain way and so I think we should be very wary of
mm,
not caring about them but I'm very interested in what do we do with them now I've really appreciated the ways they've been reworked. You can search on Google. There's a whole bunch of ways the monuments have been taken down and reworked into or recontextualized. Um, I'm not probably too much of a stickler of how we do that. I do think something needs to change though, or else the one cause won, and
mm.
that's not something we should be supporting. Um, so I think we can get creative about it though.
I do know we're slightly over time, and as long as Robin doesn't complain, I would love to ask just one question. I'm just really fascinated. Over the last year, there has been this intentional um, pushing up against DEI, various kind of African American museums. Though there's been a political challenge toward the way in which Black Americans have been telling their story and have felt safety in that, and trying to recenter the white. Even white supremacist story in America. And I'm curious, I feel like there's places around the world who have navigated deep divide and hatred among people, and they've learned how to tell the healing story so that we can move forward. I think a place maybe like South Africa and Germany, maybe not perfectly, but they've tried to do that. In your research, Justin, and when you think about kind of Black memory, like why has it been such a challenge for the United States in particular to compellingly and more in a larger scale tell a redeeming but honest story of the way in which we have been fundamentally a slave society? Is it fair if I just ask you that final question?
I'm happy to answer. I think um, the last 20 years, we've seen a pretty significant surge towards honoring slavery as like and the enslaved people.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of um, the big monument to lynching in Montgomery, Alabama.
Right, right.
Um, the
Uh, it's Brian Stevenson. Yes, I'll Google it right now.
I'm thinking of places like that. I
Mhm.
know at my undergrad's campus, we also had a monument to slavery to honor those who were enslaved. That trying to rework memory in a very recently, which is its own movement. Um, Now, why has America struggled so hard is definitely because racism is the sort of the pillars on which we've built our nation as a slave society, and that just didn't die easily. And we maybe as those of us who are called to be clergy, it's we need to usher in a quiet and painless death. That it is time to do some palliative care and to bring about the end of that. And it's due time, and we'll have lots of work after that. So maybe that's what I'll offer for that. That there's a little
Good.
pastoral aspect that
Yeah.
we need to recognize there's grieving widows somewhere,
Mhm.
but also help this thing
Mhm.
die.
Good. Thank you. And just to answer the Legacy Museum or the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Yeah. Thank you, Justin. Any final words that you want to offer us as we come to an end tonight?
I think I'll just say what I've been saying. I think the whole time is that there's no answer to any of these things that doesn't involve grace, and it's gonna be hard to swallow no matter who you are. But that is what I'm committed to as a Christian, as a person in society, and as a scholar. And so I think that. we just need to cling to the grace of the cross as much as possible,
Mm.
and be self-reflective about how we engage in the world, because there's forces at work, and we need to be on our guard, and cling to that grace.
Wow. Well, Justin, what a privilege it has been for me, and I hope for all of us, to get a glimpse of your research, get a glimpse of what you have been laboring over for many years now. And I look forward to our commission of the conference, Beloved Community Commission, of publicly celebrating and putting information out there when your book is published and in the world for all of us to read. So please know that this is when a conference will continue on to cheer and to lift you up as a scholar among us. For the healing of the world and in your words, so we can in greater ways embody grace. And so thank you, Justin, friends. Thank you for being with us. Robin, any final words that you want to offer for us as we come to an end tonight?
No, no, no final words other than Justin, good luck on your finals this week, and congratulations on submitting your book for publication just yesterday. So thank you so much, Justin.
Well, friends, be well tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Justin, thank you so much.
Thanks, Justin. That was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Good.
Well, thanks
Good.
thanks for translating your research in a way that helps church folks and pastors get a glimpse of this. So very much thank you, Justin. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right.
A blessed night then.
Yep, yep.
You take care. Good luck.